fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast, third season. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is an amazing episode because Andy Lanning and Ant Williams boards the mothership. We discuss their upcoming comic based on Slave Zero X, the video game. Now, come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Williams and Mr. Lanning. Thank you so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jeff.
Oh.
Nice for you to have us, mate.
It's totally my pleasure. So I love to start off with a question of inspiration. What inspired both of your loves for writing and who your earliest influences?
Go on, Ant.
Well, I mean, Andy's more on the writing side, so I was a comic book artist through the 90s, grew up as a comic book fan in the 70s and 80s, which to me is the golden age. And I just grew up wanting to be a comic book artist, massive Marvel fanboy. Grew to love DC as I got older and was able to get my sticky little fingers on them. And a lot of the artists going back then, the Buscema, Kirby, people like that, were definitely my early influences. And then, ongoing, there are so many wonderful comic book artists that have sprung up over the last 30 odd years. The list is too long now, but yeah, I'm happy to steal from anybody, I think is what I'm saying.
You're inspired, and you're inspired.
That's it, yes.
Homage. The homage.
And you won't be surprised because Ant and I are of the same age that pretty much my story echoes his precisely but where we differ, and this was interesting, Ant, because I used to get my comics from my American comics, because obviously we've got a UK comic scene, but they're weekly comic books. So Ant and I grew up on things like 2000 AD and Star-Lord and Action, which are black and white serialized portmanteau comics, and the Marvel and DC stuff we got, well, particularly the Marvel stuff, were reprints in black and white in weekly comic books, which reprinted. They took 4 stories. Say you'd get a Fantastic Four comic, and it would have a Fantastic Four comic in it. It would have a Hulk comic in it. It would have Captain Marvel in it and things like that. So we got exposed to all sorts of different stuff, but that was all in black and white. They just did it in black and white. But so getting your hands on a proper American full color comic was actually quite difficult to do in the UK. You go to a newsagents and there'd be a spinner rack in there, and that's where I got my comics. But Ant, you had a subscription, didn't you? Actually filled out.
Yeah. I used basically, I had a weekend job, and every penny of it basically went to a subscription service that sent me everything that Marvel published. Would turn up in a box once a month, also with a month's worth of 2000 ADs in there as well, and I didn't come out of my room for 2 or 3 days.
I never knew such things.
Coke and crisps, but apart from that,
I was going to say, I never knew such things existed. I always thought that the subscription model was always to America, and so it was like, well, how do you do that? But you obviously found the UK.
To be fair, initially I was doing the same thing as you, Andy. I was rooting around desperately trying to find comics which was soul destroying. I mean, I know you've got X-Men horror stories where you don't have the full run of stuff. And that's what it was like. If you weren't first in the corner shop, you weren't getting that issue.
So Jeff, here's the rub, right? What Ant's talking about there is my local newsagent, where I say local, it was a half-hour bike ride for me to get to it. He didn't know what comics he was getting month on month. A box would just turn up with a random selection of DC and Marvel comics in it, and so I would, it's like I was really lucky. I got like Nova issue 1 through 6 there, but also got in on the John Byrne, Chris Claremont run of X-Men from the Savage Land story right the way through up until the first part of Days of Future Past, and then the following month the second part didn't turn up. And it was like, I was like, shit, I don't know what's happening. And it took me, it must have been 2 to 3 years until Forbidden Planet opened in London. And then I went up there and I was looking around, and I had this sort of bright light bulb moment where it's like, oh my god, I can find how that story ends now, and then I bought the six. So it's like I had talk about cliffhanger. I had a cliffhanger that went on for years where I didn't know what happened in that story. So, but like Ant though, my favourite, grew up wanting to draw and write comic books myself, and it was people like Buscema, it was people like John Romita Senior, and then on the UK side it's people like Brian Bolland and Dave Gibbons and Mike McMahon, so it was always the visuals for me because like Ant, I started out wanting to be an artist. Anyway, in fact, Ant and I both started out drawing the real Ghostbusters comic for Marvel UK over here at the same time. That's how we
Very cool.
we met. And we both started our comic careers pretty much within weeks of each other.
Yeah.
Now, for modern audiences, I don't know if they recognize the luxury of having the internet to just look up what happened in the issues that you've missed. I mean, just buy the back issues to those, and the kind of thing like there's like some whining from audiences where they're like, how do you keep up? Issue 120. How do you even know what's happening? It's like you have the internet back in the day. You just missed them.
Yeah, you missed it. You had to.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly like I say over here, until the advent of things like local comic shops, and by local comic shop, it was me traveling into London. I'm on the cups. I'm like 70 miles away from London. It was a 2-hour train journey to get into London.
One of the reasons that I had a subscription, Andy, is I had to go to the next door country. I had to go to England to get mine.
Yeah, and Ant's from Wales, Jeff, which is like 250 plus miles away from London.
So you guys were kind of meant working on the real Ghostbusters, but you also worked on a comic called Angel Eyes. Was that the first time you guys worked together on a project?
Oh no. Yeah, I mean, no, that was last year we were working on that, but we go back to, I mean, we've worked on stuff pretty much year in, year out, one thing or another since 1987. So there's been one thing or another, not always mainstream publishing, but all sorts of stuff.
Well, and to be fair, it's like Ant and I, back in the 90s, shared a studio in London when Ant came up to the big city and to find his fortune. And so we had a studio together, and we worked on Marvel UK comics back in the day. I think it was the first one. It was a comic called Gun Runner. And then around that time, I started working for Epic Comics. Archie Goodwin, bless him, came over and took a comic I'd drawn and written called The Sleaze Brothers over to Epic Comics, and Ant had drawn a page of the Sleaze Brothers. Was it a spread or a full page splash?
It was a horrific page to give me with 1,000 characters.
Yeah,
all looking down into an arena. So
I was up against it on the deadline. It's the only page of that entire series that I didn't draw, and it was the one with 10 million characters in it. And so Anna drawn that, and then me going over to Marvel, we ended up working on Hokum and Hex, which was a comic book in the Clive Barker series of comics called the Barkerverse, which is very famous for actually being one of the first published places that the Wachowski brothers, as they were then, were published, doing a comic called Ecto Kid, and we did another comic, and apparently the artists and writers were matched almost randomly in that. So we were yay far away from working with the Wachowski brothers. The artist who got that book was Steve Scrose, who then went on to storyboard The Matrix. Again, sliding doors moment, and it was so close.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. We were that far away.
So when, as a writer, when you're working with your artist, is there any like sympathy for the artist? Like when you think of like a great image that you want written down, do you think to yourself, will artists want to kill me when I do it? Or do you just think, great for the story? What works for the story matters the most?
So I like to think, and can do the follow-up reply on this, but I'd like to think I'm actually quite sympathetic towards the artist because I am an artist myself, and so I always think of when I'm plotting a page, and that's the way I work personally. So when I worked with Dan Abnett, I would plot the comics and Dan would script them. And I still work that way now, even though I end up scripting them myself, but I'll only script them after the art comes in, because I want to let the artist have as full reign as possible, because I've been on the other end of that script. And as I said this recently, actually, we were saying, it's like, you can always tell somebody who hasn't scripted comics before, because they'll do the and will come into a panel description. So it'll be this phrase crops up so many times. It's like, he enters the room and raises his gun and shoots him in the head. And you go, that's not one panel. That's actually not one panel. That's probably 3 panels. Maybe even
I think I mean, I've drawn a fair amount of stuff that Andy's written, and I've drawn a fair amount of other stuff from other writers. And I think the thing that's very clear with what Andy writes is he writes visually. So I think you see it in your head, Andy, when you're writing it. So you have and you're seeing it cinematically as well, because what it comes down to is when you get the direction is there story flow there? Can you actually see how the story is progressing, and you're seeing the camera shots in your head when you're starting to thumbnail it? So some can be far more challenging than others, but as Andy says, but
the other thing is, and you've done this as well, Ant, with us, is if you're coming up, if I've got an idea in my head of how the page could look, I will sketch it out as well. That's the other thing, is do a little thumbnail. And like you said, Jeff, the joy of having instant reference to hand now is, you imagine, so back in the day, I wrote The Punisher, and whenever we were coming up with, sort of like equipment, cars, locations, I'd have to go and take a day trip to the library and photocopy stuff. I'd have to, so my sort of like library archive record would have been like looking through guns, demonology magazines, like wacky countries. It's like, it would have been a really eclectic, somewhat disturbing mix of things that I was trying to find books on, basically.
So how many do you think security in England has tracers on you for this guy has a for apparently guns?
Yeah.
Demonology.
I mean,
they do anyway, to be fair with Andy,
but that's the thing, though. It's like you imagine, like, it's like that was the only way to do it. Now I can go onto the internet, and you can, and the joy of something like Pinterest is we can create a Pinterest mood board of reference points, images, anything that you want that you can hand over to your artist. And now even now I work on Google Docs, because you can share that with an artist, and you can actually have a conversation with them in the comment section as you're writing it.
I think the opportunity to be far more collaborative is so much greater, since we moved online. Definitely. I mean, it's I mean, you don't have to be. You might not want to be with the person you're working with, but but we, like Andy says, we'll swap notes in a doc, in a Google Doc, whilst the story's developing. So it's not like it just comes to you cold.
And again, Ant calls it being collaborative. I call it, is I'm fundamentally incredibly lazy. So the more the artist can do, the better, really.
So I mean, so obviously you've learned to tolerate each other over the years, because you're working on a new project with each other by choice called Slave Zero X. So how did you get involved with this? And it's for our listeners who may not know, this is based on an upcoming video game that's based on which is a prequel to a prior video game from the 90s. So can you give a little background on that, how that whole thing, and how you got involved with the game of the company?
Okay, so very quick potted history of, I said that Ant and I shared a studio in the 90s, and in the 90s we thought we were being incredibly clever and insightful. We were like, why don't people use comic books to develop their story worlds that aren't in the comic world? So video games, for example, novels, sort of films and TV and all this sort of stuff. We're like, all this stuff we love, why aren't there comics written on them? And we thought this was, and we quite literally said we should form a company and go and see people and help them develop stuff in using comic books. At the time, it went down like a lead balloon because, quite frankly, it was like particularly in the UK, the perceived wisdom was comics are for kids. That was it. And so, but like, cut to 30 years later, everyone wants to develop something using comic books. And there's me and Ant sitting there going, see, told you. It's like, we're bloody geniuses. So we set up a little company together called Ideas and Inks, doing exactly that. We're like taking our experience as comic writers and creators and artists to help people use comic books to expand what we call a story world. And it's like, it's and we have to like explain it to people because we understand that, being comics people, we understand what a comics universe or a story world, a shared universe is. But actually telling that to people who are working with IPs outside of the comics room, it's like they don't necessarily understand what they've got. And and so whereas the Ziggurat team is the company that are making Slave Zero X. They do get it because they work in retro games and they work for fans. They take old retro games and upscale them and do remakes of them, and in the case of Slave Zero X, do a prequel to this 90s first-person shooter that because it's a prequel to actually it's the early 2000s. I don't know whether this was the reasoning for it, but in my head, I've just kind of realized that because it was like the original game came out in the early 2000s, they're doing a prequel and they're doing it as a side-scrolling sort of 8-bit adventure, which is directly from the 90s. So it's like they've kind of set the game in a weird sort of meta universe. And we were talking to them about creating some comic stories to support the launch of the game, because they like I say, they're serving their fans. They know that their fans love comic books. I think we've said this before, is that it's not a Venn diagram as far as an overlap concerned. It's just a single circle. It's like you're into gaming, you're into comics, done deal. And not only that, Slave Zero X has got this incredibly rich story world that they had developed out. Francine Bridge, who's the art director on it, had written a load of extra material to go with this, and so it was a lot of material that not necessarily is going to come out in the game. So we took some of that material. And it was funny enough, it's one where Ant and I developed all the stories and worked with the artists. We got 3 different artists to work on the stories, because in the game there are levels, as you can imagine. You take on a boss at each level, and the levels are based on zones of this cyberpunk dystopian city called Mega City, funnily enough. And each of the zones, which have got these great names, like Zone 1 is called the Hell of Rising Mists, and Zone 3 is called the Hell of Many Colors. Each one's got its own boss, but each zone is kind of designed in a different look and aesthetic. So because our stories are focused on 3 different characters from these 3 different zones, we got 3 different artists to draw them. So each story looks different as well, which is really cool. We got Clark Bint, English artist, to do one of the stories. He's drawing the Rebel Moon adaptation at the moment, the comics based on the Zack Snyder movie. And we got Anna Reedman, another English artist. She drew one of the other stories. She's fantastic too. And we got a US artist called Andy McDonald, who I shared a table with at the Motor City Con and got to look at his art, and he's awesome. I'm going to work with him one of these days, and so we were able to work with him on it as well. And pretty much basically create 3 different stories about characters that appear in the game, almost like prequel stories that set them up, almost like going into the game. It's like all this stuff has just happened and now start the game. And that those stories are going to be printed in quite literally in the rule book that you get in the game box, but then they're also going to be presented in a more traditional comic format, sort of US sized, but in a hardcover book in the super deluxe edition, which is also going to have artwork of all about the development of the game, basically. So all the behind the scenes art designs and level designs and all of that stuff. So it's going to be a really lovely little package that for the fans. So yeah, so that's what that's what we've been up to with Slave Zero X, and that's all coming out at the end of February, actually.
So when you guys are thinking about the story, both visually and stylistically, you're basically talking about a story of a game that came out originally around 1999, 2000, and also, but also the prequel comes out in 2023. So visually and stylistically, are you thinking about retro, how it would have looked like it was done in the 90s, this from your comic book standpoint? You're looking at it from what the modern audience in 2023 are looking for. What are you guys thinking when you approached it?
So I think the main one was to give each artist their own freedom to draw it in their style. I think so rather than go back and draw it in a sort of 90s, I guess we could have done it in a sort of image style from the 90s with everyone would have had as many pouches as they could possibly fit on their costumes and cybernetic arms up the wazoo.
Cross hats within an inch of their life. Yeah,
exactly. So, but no, with us it was much more about just letting the artists do their thing. So that each of them definitely they've got their own flavour. But the sensibility is much more to do with letting the current art style, or at least the art style of the artist involved.
So and they are very specific, the art styles on each story, and they definitely reflect the story. So and it's one of the things that I most enjoy about this is seeing different artists interpreting the same story world, because they're approaching it in a completely different way, which fits the tone of each story as well. So I think it works amazingly well on this.
So when you guys are thinking about plotting as well, you're basically running a prequel to a prequel of a game. You got to make sure it all lines up perfectly with what was the original game from 20 years ago. So how hard is it to write a story connecting all the dots when you're basically writing build to 2 games ahead, basically from a plot point standpoint?
Well, what made that a lot easier, Jeff, was the fact that, like I say, Francine, who'd worked on all the art stuff, had written a really detailed timeline that basically laid all of that out for me, and showed how it then joins up with the old game, which this one is the prequel to. If again, it's another one of those ones, if you start thinking too much about it, blood comes out your ears. But that did make it a lot easier, because what I was then, all I had to focus on was telling a story that put the character where they were in the game when you play the game. So when you play the game, there's one character in here which is the main title character, Slave Zero X, which is a biomechanical suit, and we get to see a scene which is alluded to in the game, but with their creator, Dr. Teru, but you only ever hear Dr. Teru on a voice recording in the game. So we got to expand that relationship and what happened there, which actually ends up with Slave Zero X getting flushed into the sewers and found by the rebel group, which is where they are at the beginning of the story. And the same with another one of the characters, there's a character called Atavaka, where you get to see that character operating and doing stuff again that is only alluded to in the game when you catch up with that character and interact with them, and the same with our hero's sidekick character Aisha. We get to see a story from her past which explains where they are at the beginning of the story and why they've got beef with the ruling caste in the story. So that simplified it enough, because I don't think I've got, again, not only am I very lazy, I've also got a very small brain, and I don't think I could have coped with trying to play and spin all of those plates at the same time. Someone else did that for me, God bless them.
Now, an interesting thing is what I read was that, or at least, and important is the word, it said the protagonist merged with the prototype combat robot Slave Zero X. Now, what do they mean exactly by merge? And if this humanoid character merged with the machine, what is the impact on the human when that part is now part of him or her or it, depending.
So it's our human protagonist is a character called Shu, I believe is how you pronounce it. But he's one of the rebels, and he's being sort of like he's been sort of being trained to be the weapon for the resistance to go and take down Sovkhan, who's the evil overlord, and doesn't get his opportunity to do that, and is kind of a bit resentful because his training partner gets to do that instead, and then is never seen again. So it's like kind of like, oh well, you know, you actually dodged a bullet there, but he wants to go and take down the overlord. And then when Slave Zero X comes along, they kind of make a pact together, and yet they fuse together. So you've actually got two characters. You've got Slave Zero X, who's meant to just be a killing machine, literally a slave, but has got its own conscience and its own ego, and who begins to learn and evolve as a character as they go along. So to begin with, Slave Zero X is just literally bloodthirsty. He just wants to kill, kill, kill. And by the end of it has evolved as a character, and you know, there's kind of like a reversal between them by that point, which is, again, it's an interesting thing in terms of, because what you're actually doing is you're side scrolling through, blowing things up, slashing and hacking away like a good one, and then there's this, and then as you go progress through, there's these layers of story begin to reveal themselves, which is also, I think it's like it's a very cool way to tell a story using the gameplay.
So the machine part, Slave Zero X, obviously, I mean, I understand your protagonist's motivation. Slave Zero X, the machine, why does it want to be on the rebels? Like, does it have a morality, or does it have the morality of whoever its host? Maybe it's like sort of like a Venom host situation, I guess. And what would a Slave Zero X been on the other side if it was claimed by someone on that side?
So I think what the motivation to begin with Slave Zero X is quite primal, because it's been labeled as a defect because it's got this sense of self, and it's like, oh no, we can't be doing with that. But its creator, rather than destroying it outright, like I say, flushes it down into the lower levels, into the hell of rising mists. So Slave Zero X's motivation to begin with is actually just pure anger and revenge. It's like just to swipe back at you know, I've been cast down and rejected. But as the character evolves during the game, its motivations change along the way. So again, I think that's you know, what starts out as something that's full of hatred and revenge actually ends up to be a little bit more sophisticated and nuanced.
So the game takes place in the year 2495, obviously with the far future. So how did you guys visualize the world build? I know you said part of it was the game was, you know, the people involved in the game kind of give you some of the world building, but as someone who has to actually put the characters in the situation, how did you visualize what was that was going to look like? And was there a thought as well, because it is a prequel, that it has to look somewhat predate to what was going to come later?
I mean, I think with something like this goes back to what we were saying. We want to do with building story worlds, because what you do is you take the material that you do have and you develop it out, and using different artists is a great way as well to develop it out like that as well, because it's interpretations of. So an artist can't help themselves but to run with an idea, you know. So I think that's the beauty of it. There's a ton of source material which kicks you off, and then you just grow from there. Then, you know. So I mean, that's you know, that is pretty much why, you know, telling stories like this works so well. With regard to I mean, the prequel takes place, like, you know, I wouldn't say 10 minutes before the game starts, but it's close enough that we don't have to worry too much about that. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Andy.
And I think exactly that, and is we you know, from the artist's point of view, is they've got really, because, and again, this will be part of the art book that gets printed. There's so much that they create that you don't see about in game development unless they do an art of book. And even when they do the art of book, stuff still gets, it has to make the cut. So you're looking at some wonderful images that are designing levels, but they're all specific to the game and how you play the game, moving across, to give a sense of place, which is again the difference in mindset when as an artist is you then have to turn that into a three-dimensional background that you're telling a story in, and that's a different sensibility and different way of using that reference, and you've got to run with it. So where I'm what I'm thinking of particularly is Clark Bint's story, which takes place in the recreational district called the Hell of Many Colors. There's these wonderful garish landscapes they designed of buildings and stuff, but Clark has to go into one of them. And so he's then got a facade that he can reference, but then he's like, now we're going into that, and it's like, and there may only be snippets of it that you see in the game. He's actually turned it into a full set where action takes place, and that's really good fun, I think. And I think from the artist's point of view, they took that and they did run with they run with it, and added to the world.
Now this is perhaps the most important question. Have you guys played the game, and are you guys good at it?
Well, I know Ant's answer to this.
Yeah, rueful chuckle. Yeah. No, I haven't. And if I did, I'd be terrible at
it. There is a demo version on Steam at the moment that you can play, which has an opening level from the game that you can play out, as well as a training level to it. So yes, I've had a go on that. I wasn't particularly any good because it was an early demo version, and I'm a PC game player, as opposed to a console gameplay. And the version that I was trying to play was more set up it was more console friendly than PC friendly. So that's my excuse for why I was so crap at it, and I'm sticking to it. But when it actually comes out, I'm gonna go and wrestle back control of my PlayStation here, which my daughter's got in her bedroom at the moment, because I do love a side scroller like these. They are really good fun, and the gameplay is it's just bonkers. It's like really, really over the top action style.
Now, as far as for listeners where they can get it, now for the people who are getting the cartridge, you can get it. It comes within the packaging of the cartridge. Now, is there a digital version available for those getting the digital game, or is the game not available in digital?
Yes, they're going to do a digital package as well, and the best place is to go onto the I think it's just cigarette.com there to their website, and they'll point you to where you can get the different versions. Like I say, it's out on Steam as well. But if you go via Cigarette, you can also then hunt down whether you want to get the extra super duper deluxe version, with all the bells and whistles.
So this is a miniseries, or this is a graphic one issue graphic novel?
Yeah, it's just each story is about 12 pages or therein, because this was the really cool thing about it, by the way. I think is each story is about 6 regular comic pages long, but we had to reformat them for the cartridge version because it's a completely different shape and format. So there was a lot of resizing and rejigging of artwork. So that in total works out like 2 or 3 times longer. It's about 24.
Yeah, they come out and there's about 20-page stories, I think. Yeah. I mean, we kind of went into it knowing that it was going to be potentially in 2 or 3 different formats. So you've got to try and be sneaky with how you design the pages. So the artists all had a sort of a template to work to, and we were there with our digital scissors and sellotape at the end of it, rebuilding them into different shapes and formats.
So what's next for you guys after this project? You guys doing something else together? Are you guys doing separate projects?
No, we still keeping going. So as you mentioned, Angel Eyes was a comic we worked on, which Ant drew all of last year. Actually, it was, and a bit of the year before that. And that was a VR comic, It's on the Oculus Quest store. It's free as well, so there's no excuses. If you've got a Quest, go get it, because it's really cool. And it was something we did with Sky Immersive. Sky are a TV company over here, and it was they had an immersive department. They wanted to test out different types of storytelling in VR, and the guy called Matt McCarthy, who's head of that department, had seen what we'd done with Madefire. I don't know if you're familiar with Madefire at all, Jeff, but Madefire was a comics platform. It's unfortunately no longer. It went bust during COVID, but they developed a motion comic platform which had parallax and things. So characters moved around in it. There's a soundtrack on it. You could have special effects. You could choose when the word balloons come in and stuff like this. We took that notion and put it into VR. So the best I can describe it is, if you imagine sitting in the front row of an IMAX theater and reading a comic book that's three-dimensional at that scale, because that's what it looks like. When you put the VR helmet on, you've just got giant panels and things are moving around at different layers and elements. Things can fly past you, and you've got stereo sound to it as well.
Wow.
So there's a proper soundtrack to it. The guy who did the music for Ted Lasso did the music for Angel Eyes, which is kind of funky too. So
very cool.
yeah, no, it's a full-on production. It's really, really neat. We had a blast working on that,
Yeah.
and it was great fun.
Well, Mr.
Yeah,
Lanning,
and then I mean, we're also working on something called Meta Travelers at the moment, which is that goes back a little ways. We were working with these guys. They were building this 3D digital worlds. It was coming off when NFTs were spinning up, but now they've taken it massively a step further and created a whole toy line around these amazing character designs that they came up with, amazing 3D character designs, which had a huge Kickstarter success. So now, we've had an ongoing relationship with them. We're always working with them, developing stories for them as well, which is cool. And I'm noodling away on something right now in between doing these calls. So no, that's a lot of fun, and they're doing some amazing stuff as well.
So Jeff, with that was an action figure Kickstarter they did, and they did it with the Four Horsemen, the guys who came from Tom McFarlane Toys. As you could imagine, these toys are absolutely amazing. They've got like interchangeable heads, hands, all these different add-on bits and pieces that go with them. And so we've been working with them, designing the characters, and again fleshing out the story world. It's kind of like that's our trick. That's our unique selling point at the moment, I think.
So when will that be ready to discuss?
So there's something coming out with that. We're looking to launch something with them in March. Everything going well, so we should have more details on that. Maybe we can do a follow-up with you then and share a lot more stuff.
Yeah, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Yeah, definitely come on and talk about that next. It was a great pleasure, Mr. Lanning, Mr. William. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, it's our pleasure, Jeff.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Have a fantastic day.
Yeah,
Cheers,
you too.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Traversing Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Sure, return for the next exciting episode when Aaron Walke boards the mothership. He's the producer, executive producer, and writer of Star Trek Prodigy,